Imagine a single ancient text, so powerful it helps shape the social fabric of an entire civilization for centuries, only to become one of the most fiercely debated books in the modern world. Well, welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving deep into the Manusmriti. Our journey today is going to take us all the way from the bustling ancient villages of India straight through to the modern era, where this text has become a massive symbol of intense debate.
But that brings up a really fascinating question, right? How exactly does an ancient guide for everyday moral living transform into such a huge modern controversy? Well, by the end of this explainer, you're going to completely understand the evolution of the ancient Indian legal system, how British colonialism drastically changed the way this text was actually used, and the incredibly complex realities of the laws of Manu today.
All right, let's get our facts straight first. What actually is the Manusmriti? Sometimes called the Laws of Manu, it's an ancient Sanskrit text belonging to the Smriti tradition, which literally means that which is remembered. It was composed roughly between 200 BCE and 200 CE, and at its core, it's a treatise on Dharma. Now, in ancient India, Dharma wasn't just a set of strict, boring laws. It was the entire moral framework. It meant your personal duty, the social order, and basically the right way of living to keep the whole universe in harmony.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the ancient legal system, understanding the Manusmriti, British colonial codification, modern controversies and criticisms, and finally, its legacy in modern India. Let's get into it.
Part 1. The Ancient Legal System and the Foundations of Justice. Before we even look at the text itself, we have to imagine the world it existed in. Long before modern Supreme Courts, how did ancient India actually hand out justice? Well, they had a remarkably developed, tiered judicial system. Think of it kind of like a pyramid. At the very bottom, you had the kula, or family councils. Imagine sitting around the dinner table to hash out a family dispute with the elders. Above that was the shreni, professional councils for business folks and artisans. Next up was the Gana, the village assembly, which is basically like a modern local city council. And finally, at the very top was the king's court, where the chief justice and the king handled the absolute most severe cases.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the king's role. You might think he was just a total dictator who could do whatever he wanted, right? Actually, no. According to the sources, the king was strictly bound by the precepts of Dharma. Handing out justice was his #1 job, and he was required to be totally impartial. His duty was to uphold the law and protect the public based on a very strict moral code. And when it came to actually handing out punishments, that heavily depended on the crime and the court level. For instance, the king didn't waste time intervening in minor family squabbles. Those stayed in the family. Punishments could range from severe social boycotts and banishment, which was meant to cause immense psychological agony, all the way to financial fines that were specifically used to compensate the victims.
Moving on to Part 2, understanding the Manusmriti, cosmic order and duty. So, within this massive, complex society, what did Manu actually write down? It's not just a boring list of legal rules. The text actually tries to connect everyday human behavior to the cosmic order of the entire universe. It's broken down into a few core themes. First, it starts with cosmogony, literally explaining how the world was created. Then, it defines where Dharma comes from. A huge chunk of the text is dedicated to the specific duties of the 4 varnas, or social classes, paying really close attention to the Brahmins, the priests, and the Kshatriyas, the warriors and rulers. It also dives into the Saptanga theory, which outlines the 7 essential limbs of a functioning state, from the king all the way down to the treasury.
All right, Part 3. British colonial codification. This is a monumental shift.
This right here is where everything changes. The way the Manusmriti was viewed shifted forever when the British East India Company took power in India. It's a perfect example of why historical context is absolutely everything. So, the text is ancient, right? But skip ahead to 1794. A British judge named Sir William Jones translates it into English. Why? Because colonial administrators were actively hunting for an authentic source of law to govern their Hindu subjects. They plucked this specific text out of history and basically turned it into the bedrock of what became known as Anglo-Hindu law.
Okay, let's use a real-world example to see why that was such a massive problem. Imagine picking up a really deep philosophical book on personal ethics, and suddenly, the government enforces it as a strict, zero-tolerance modern traffic law manual. It just doesn't work. In ancient India, the Manusmriti was a theoretical commentary, a moral guide, but the British mistook it for a strict, unbreakable code of positive law. By enforcing it in court, they literally froze dynamic, evolving social customs into rigid rules, which had a huge impact on social mobility and rights.
Which brings us to part 4, modern controversies and criticisms.
Because of what's written inside it and exactly how the British weaponized it, the Manusmriti is incredibly polarizing today. It's a subject of intense debate, and the sources show us two very different perspectives. On one hand, the traditionalist view argues that the text was originally meant to be a guide for spiritual duty, promoting a society based on personal merit, cosmic order, and actual qualities rather than just birthright. But on the exact opposite side, the reformist view strongly criticizes the text as a rigid tool that deliberately institutionalized severe caste oppression, strict social hierarchy, and deep-seated patriarchy.
To really grasp the feminist critique of the text, we can look at specific verses. Chapter 9, verse 3, for instance, states, "A woman does not deserve independence." It outlines that a woman must be protected by her father in childhood, her husband in youth, and her sons in old age. Now, traditionalists argue this was purely about providing protection in a highly dangerous ancient world. However, modern critics and feminist scholars point out that this explicitly denies women personal autonomy, limits property rights, and enforces patriarchal control that fundamentally clashes with modern equality.
And look, this isn't just an academic debate. It sparked real, massive historical events. Because the text ranks society into a hereditary hierarchy with unequal rights and harsher punishments for lower castes, it became a major focal point for the Dalit rights movement. In fact, in 1927, the incredibly influential social reformer B.R. Ambedkar famously burned the Manusmriti in a public protest. He completely rejected its authority, citing it as the absolute root of systemic caste discrimination in India.
Part 5. Let's do a quick recap of the core facts. We've covered a lot of history here, so let's lock in the main takeaways. Number 1, the text started as an ancient moral commentary focused on Dharma. 2, it operated within a really complex, capable hierarchy of ancient Indian courts. 3, its historical path was totally altered when the British mistakenly codified it into rigid law. And 4, today, it remains at the center of intense debate regarding human rights, caste, and gender.
And finally, Part 6, its legacy in modern India, the laws of the people.
So, where does that leave the Manusmriti right now? Well, in 1950, a newly independent India made a definitive historic choice. It adopted its modern constitution, which explicitly guarantees equality for all citizens, completely regardless of caste, gender, or religion. By doing that, modern India legally replaced the ancient laws of Manu with the laws of the people. Sure, the text is still a crucial piece of historical and cultural study, but its specific social rules have been fully superseded by the modern pursuit of human equality.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question to ponder. How do we best balance the study of ancient historical wisdom and the very societies that built our world with the absolute, non-negotiable demands of modern human equality? It is not an easy question, but understanding complex texts like the Manusmriti is a huge part of figuring out the answer. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you next time.